Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Mr. Terence Corrigan. Terence, how are you doing?
I'm good, and yourself?
I'm doing pretty good, thank you. And coming back from holiday, joining us from the UK, where he is temporarily going to be broadcasting from, is Marius Roodt. Marius, how are you doing?
How's it, Nick? How's it, Terence? Nice, everybody. Just let everybody's worried. Let them know I haven't abandoned the Republic. I'm just in the UK for a bit. So we'll be back in God's own country in a bit.
It's a working holiday of sorts.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So just come and see the sights of London, whatever. I'll be advising Boris Johnson, but I might lose his job, but we'll see.
Yeah, who knows if you'll still be there by the end of your time in the UK.
You've probably got a history of doing stuff like that, haven't you?
Oh, the last place I was in just voted for a lefty, so who knows? We'll see what happens.
Yes, no, it's also worth pointing out that Marius was planning a trip to Russia just before the Russia-Ukraine war broke out. So he's clearly the sort of the bringer of chaos. But anyway, we'll get to that a little bit later. Let's start off with a local story, and this is about South Africa's sewage system, which is a thing that no one wants to talk about, but is actually all very near and dear to our hearts because when it stops working, everyone knows about it and everyone wants it desperately to start working as fast as possible. Well, the Green Drop Report, which is a report that looks into the quality of water treatment and sewage treatment across the country, has been published after the last one was published in 2013, so 9 years ago. And unsurprisingly, especially to any South African who lives in a small town across the country, particularly in Limpopo or the Eastern Cape, South Africa's water treatment plants are not in a great state. The number of critical water treatment plants has increased from 248 to 334. So the report gives every treatment plant in the country a score out of 100%. And to be listed as critical, you have to have a score of below 30%. So in other words, sort of South African matric pass mark. So we've got an increase in the number that are in critical state. And as to the ones that have a 50% score, which is sort of the bare minimum, about half are not complying with standards. And this is down from 2013, when the average score for water treatment plants was about 61%, so it's down to 50, which is obviously some serious deterioration in the quality of service. And this, of course, as I'm sure everyone knows, has terrible consequences, not just for people who might be affected by the lack of sewage treatment in their drinking water. Maybe there's cross-contamination, but also the environment, which is one of the big problems that this report cites. There's an enormous amount of leakage into the environment, not only before water is treated in water treatment plants, but also as it's going in to the water treatment plant, there's leaks in the system. And so a lot of sewage is getting out into the environment. And that, unfortunately, will make its way sometimes into drinking water supplies, poor communities, wildlife habitats, all that kind of stuff. So really not great stuff. Terence, what do you make of this story? It just seems like another sort of facet of infrastructure that needs some serious overhaul.
It's interesting that this comes up today because 13 years ago, in 2009, I actually did a project about South Africa's water supply and water problems. And it seems that despite this having been flagged back then as a kind of critical issue, for various reasons, not least of which that South Africa is a water-scarce country, we don't seem to have made a great deal of progress. I remember back at that time, and I think we actually talked about this on a show about 2 weeks ago. Anthony Turton, I think, had just been expelled from the CSIR for raising concerns about this. And a lot of what he said in that paper, I think, is entirely current now. He said that we have kind of allocated all of pretty much our entire water supply. We have to now be a lot more efficient with it, especially as the population grows. If you have sewage treatment plants have a particular role in this because everyone knows the story about you take a liter of used motor oil and dump it in a river, and that contaminates X thousand liters of surrounding water, and it's exactly the same principle applies. I remember the stories about the knock-on effects of this were legion, not least of which was the fact that there were apparently shark attacks that were being attributed to sewage flows at the coastline because they were attracting sharks, to what they thought might be a food source. Look, I don't know how shark sensitivity works. My knowledge of sharks is kind of limited to Jaws and deep blue sea volumes 1 to 3, but apparently this is a thing. It's a situation in general. But yeah, these are the wages of misgovernance, disposing of a very, very small pool of skills that existed when it should have been expanded, and when those skills we had should have been nurtured, and a prioritization of flashy ribbon cutting projects over maintaining what previously existed.
When sewage treatment works, it's quite a marvel in that, and I don't think sewage engineers talk about this an awful lot because, as is quite understandable, it makes people quite nervous. But in some cities around the world, if you treat water properly, it's actually, fine to put that treated sewage water back into the drinking supply, and you don't have any negative effects. But of course, if you try doing that when your systems are not working well, you're going to have very, very bad things happen to your population. And no one is going to be very happy about that. Yes. Marius, what do you make of all this? It's just kind of another sort of facet of the crisis in local government, I guess, that's happening across the country. Yeah, exactly. And but just earlier, you at the beginning of the segment, you said it's something that people in small towns across the country are used to. I think we should just point out this has been a problem it's becoming a bigger problem in more places that are a bit more developed, a bit bigger. Nelson Mandela Bay recently had the problem where, and the mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay, her name escapes me now, but said people must put bleach in their water. But she didn't say how much, how much bleach you must put in a liter. She just said put bleach in it. So if you go put exactly, if you put half a liter of bleach into half a liter of water, you're probably going to die if you drink it. So that's probably not a very good idea. But I remember a couple of years ago, I was actually, this was also around about 2009, 2010. I was at a presentation with Anthony Turton and another guy. I think he was the MC of the event. Said he was at he'd gone to a small village somewhere in South Africa, and he said to the guy, "Please describe your water situation in one word." So the guy said, "Good." He said, "Okay, please describe it in 2 words." And the guy said, "Not good." So I think that probably explains the situation in South Africa. But probably a lot of people who listen to the show have heard of a guy called R.W. Johnson, Bill Johnson. He writes often for Politics Web. And he had a situation where he was very badly personally affected by this water situation. This is about 10 years ago, I think. It's maybe not as long as that, but definitely more than 5 years ago. He was swimming in a lagoon somewhere on the Natal South Coast, stood on a rock, and his foot got infected with some kind of bacteria. He actually had to have his leg amputated. And the bacteria was in the lagoon because of sewage was flowing into the lagoon. And that's obviously because the sewage plants were breaking down and what have you. So, this affects people badly. And apparently, R.W. Johnson was very close to dying. He's very lucky that he only, it's obviously still a terrible situation, but he's very lucky that at the end of the day, he only lost his leg and didn't lose his life. So this is the kind of thing that's going to happen. And this didn't happen last week. This happened, as I say, between 5 and 10 years ago, definitely quite a while ago. So it's something that's been with us for a while, and doesn't seem that there's anything happening to really fix the situation. And it's one thing, mentioned before, it's one thing to have no electricity. Load shedding is pretty bad, but once you can't even drink the water that's coming out of your taps, and you've got water shedding, and not everybody's got the opportunity to have JoJo tanks and whatever you outside their house or to filter their water. And as with anything, this affects poorest people the most. And people
a lot of people don't have the opportunity to, be able to filter their water and whatever. So as with everything in this country, it's, poorer South Africans are going to suffer the most. But obviously a situation like water treatment plants breaking down affects everybody.
Yep.
Right. No, exactly. And, you just think of like kids live in formal settlements. Sometimes they play along riverbanks and stuff. And the same thing can happen to them because the water in those rivers around big cities is often so dirty that, you get a little cut, you put your hand in the water by mistake, you're a little kid, you don't know better, and then suddenly you have to go to a government hospital, and that's not fun for anyone, not least the kid at all. Terence, any final thoughts?
Well, just on that, there's actually a big motif in Peter Weir's 1982 movie, The Year of Living Dangerously, where Billy Kwan, the diminutive Chinese Australian photojournalist, played by a female actor, incidentally. I think the only time a female actress has won an Oscar for playing a male character, is taking care of this family, and the child gets sick, and he says, he swims in the canal. Don't you understand what is in that canal? And that's kind of that was kind of like the Peter Weir's device for showing the human cost of poverty and underdevelopment and the hubris of the government at the time.
I would for a moment. You've actually reminded me, speaking of the Year of Living Dangerously, of how, as bad as things are with our water treatment systems, it still can be worse. And my father was working in Indonesia in the early 2000s. He was in Jakarta for a while, and Jakarta, I do not believe at the time treated its wastewater. It just dumped it into the sea. And so he once took a boat trip out of the city to some island nearby, and they passed over the area where the sewage leaks in, and that was, he said, quite the experience. The smell is like something you cannot imagine to describe, because Jakarta is a very, very big city. So anyway, could be worse. We're not there yet, but let's hope that we don't get there anytime soon. Okay, so enough with that. Let's talk about things further afield. So Marius, you have just come back from Colombia, as you mentioned at the beginning, and just as you were there, Colombia was having quite a close presidential election where there was an initial first round, and the vote came down. The two candidates who went through to the second round, because they have a similar system to the French, was a kind of anti-establishment right-wing guy and an anti-establishment left-wing guy who was formerly a rebel guerrilla in the country's internal conflicts. And the leftist president won. Can you tell us a little bit about what you saw in Colombia, what some people said, and what you learned about the country?
Yeah, well, actually, I don't think the leftist guy, the guy who won, Gustavo Petro, his name is actually, I don't know if we can call him an anti-establishment guy anymore. He was a leftist guerrilla, as you correctly pointed out, when he was a youngster. But he's been an MP since the early 90s. He's been a senator. He's been the mayor of Bogota. So he's been, involved in the establishment.
He's climbed the traditional pathway up to presidency.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but he's definitely more of a left-wing guy. He's the first real left-wing guy to become president of Colombia in the country's history, really. They've always elected right-wing guys or center-right guys. So he's also a bit of but I think was really trying to choose between a bad option and an even worse option, maybe. I mean, this left-wing guy, Petro, he's said, Hugo Chavez was maybe not such a bad guy. He went to Hugo Chavez's funeral. He said there should be, Colombia and Venezuela have had problems going back many years, but he said Colombia needs to get closer to Venezuela. He
wants to normalize relations with Venezuela,
exactly,
despite the Maduro regime's many crimes.
But then the guy, the more right-wing guy, he's also a strange guy, older guy. They call him Colombia's Trump. Rodolfo Hernandez is his name. He's also kind of been exactly. He didn't attend any of the debates. He just put out videos on TikTok, and he still came second in the runoff and second in this election. But he's also said some weird things. He also is not really that anti-establishment. He's been the mayor of quite a big city in Colombia, even though he hasn't been an MP or whatever. But what was interesting, he was asked, I'm not too sure how long ago this was, but asking about people he admired, and he said he admires this very famous German philosopher. You might have heard of him, a guy called Adolf Hitler. And when people called him out on it, he said, no, he misspoke. And he actually meant another famous German called Albert Einstein. So it's quite interesting that if he did really confuse the two guys, or if he was being honest about who he supported there. But when I was there in Colombia, there were quite a few posters up for the various guys, for Hernandez and Petro and whatever. I didn't speak with politics to too many people, but two people I did speak about it with was a guy who was a guard. He was about 30. He said he was actually going to be out of the country over the weekend when they had the election, but he said he would vote for Petro because he said people are a bit sick of the status quo. But then I spoke to another lady who was also one of our guards, and she said her whole family was on Petro's side, but she said she had a lot of friends from Venezuela who said a lot of his rhetoric was very similar to what Hugo Chavez used to say. It's time for change. It's time to change how things are. And she seemed a bit cagey about saying who she did support. I'm not too sure if she was a supporter of Petro, and she was just saying how terrible things are in Venezuela. Apparently, there's some beautiful islands off the coast of Venezuela, but now they're basically abandoned because you can't really go there for tourism anymore, and Venezuelans themselves can't really go visit it. There's no real internal tourism market there anymore. So, yeah, it was an interesting time to be there. But I do think, as I was saying to you guys earlier, I think this with Petro and Hernandez being the two guys who came through to being in the runoff, it's we've been seeing around the world with the kind of your anti-establishment candidates being the guys who've been elected or doing pretty well. Even if they don't maybe get elected, they always push the incumbents or the establishment guys pretty hard. The guy who was kind of the candidate for the establishment, a guy called Federico Gutierrez or Fico. He came third in the runoff. He got about he just lost out to Hernandez, this right-wing guy who likes Adolf Hitler. So, but I think this is, and he was kind of the establishment candidate. All the traditional sort of centre-right or right-wing parties were backing him for the win. But I think this is a kind of a pattern we're seeing around the world. And now we've seen, most of Latin America is now governed by, it's got left-wing presidents except for Ecuador really and Brazil. But it seems it's a good chance of left-wing Lula will probably beat Bolsonaro in Brazil at the end of the year. So as you're saying, Nick, before the show, there's things go through kind of waves, and I think we're seeing a kind of left-wing wave in Latin America again. But that's going to be I think it's going to be quite a big deal, especially for the relations of these countries to places like the EU and the US and what have you. They might turn more to China or even Russia now maybe, but we'll see what happens. But I think it's interesting times for Colombia, and as I say, the first time they've ever voted an out-and-out socialist as president there.
Yeah, apparently there was also a major sort of crackdown by police on protesters and infringement of civil liberties and stuff beforehand, which is what spelled the doom for the sort of establishment centre-right candidate, as far as I understand. So that's quite interesting. But, we sort of seem to be seeing a pattern now where whoever's an incumbent at the moment with inflation and instability it seems to be in a lot of trouble, and we'll get to another example of that soon. But Terence, what do you make of this?
Well, just as a comment that's slightly off base, South Africa, despite having one of the largest diplomatic footprints in the world, does not actually have an embassy in Colombia. South Africa's diplomat, there is a consulate apparently.
But we have diplomats everywhere.
Yes, but not in not in the Latin American country that comprises something like a quarter of the continent's population. South Africa's diplomatic relations are run out with Colombia, are run out of Caracas, which must be a jolly situation. My understanding of this is that South Africa has never taken an interest in that relationship because Colombia has tended to be a right-leaning pro-US Latin American country, and that is, as I say, despite the population, also despite the fact that it's got significant mineral resources and therefore sort of opportunities for South African firms. But we have put enormous amount of political capital into a relationship with Venezuela, with which we trade virtually not at all, and with which we don't really have much of a relationship, not even a sort of struggle-era relationship. That's just that just says a great deal of where your tax dollars go when they enter the diplomatic corps. The rejection of the establishment just seems to be a theme that that is coming up again and again and again. Outside of, I suppose, your East Asia, which outside the Philippines maybe seems to value order over change, which I think has an interesting purchase on, you know, how countries are able to position themselves geopolitically in years to come, as the rest of the world looks inward and defaults to protectionism. You know, are your East Asian societies both your more democratic and more authoritarians, and then in a position to start reshaping the world in their own image?
It's an interesting question. Okay, let's carry on to our next one, which is also about foreign elections, and this is the sort of part 2 of the French election story. So France has its presidential election, and then a little bit after it has its legislative election, so basically who sits in the parliament. And Emmanuel Macron's party, which did hold a majority in the French parliament, so he won, I wouldn't call it quite a comfortable victory against Marine Le Pen, but a sizable one. Earlier this year, the legislative elections happened, and it looked like Macron was going to suffer a little bit of a beating, particularly at the hands of the far-left coalition, which was basically all the French left-wing parties kind of formed one bloc that were going to all vote together. They, I believe, did manage to get the highest number of seats in the election. And so Macron's party lost its vote, its majority there, and now has to form a coalition in order to keep its sort of legislative program running. However, it wasn't just the left that gained. Marine Le Pen's right-wing party, the National Rally, also gained significantly in the elections. They had previously only, I think, had 3 or 4 seats in the French legislature, and they shot up all the way to 89 seats, which means that if you broke apart the left-wing alliance into its constituent parties, not a single one of those parties would be as big as the Front National. So clearly, this is quite upsetting for Macron. Apparently, according to sort of French insider political journalists, he is quite shocked by this. He didn't expect to take such a hammering from both left and right. And even Marine Le Pen is apparently surprised by how great her party's surge in seats has been. They expected to get quite a few, maybe 60 seats, but they got 89, which is far beyond what they were expecting. So once again, quite interesting stuff. It looks like the sort of center is not too popular at the moment. And once again, I suspect something like inflation is playing a big role in people's dissatisfaction with the incumbent. Marius, what do you make of that?
I'll just say I'll push back a little bit. I think saying the centre isn't that popular. I think we have to look at it in relative terms, because Macron's party is still easily the biggest party, even if you're looking at just the Macron alliance or Macron's party alone. It's still easily the biggest party in the French parliament. So, but as you say, I mean, he did lose his majority and had a fairly comfortable majority before this. So he's definitely going to have to work with, either Le Pen or the more hard left guys that are now in parliament. But also, it's the old established parties of French politics have been absolutely annihilated. The Socialist Party, which is part of this new left-wing alliance, only got 26 seats out of the 500. The Republicans, which is kind of the successors to the Gaulle's party, only got about 61 seats. So it was absolutely. I mean, the traditional parties have been, did badly again. So did their candidates in the presidential elections. So I think, it's. I think this is going to. Just as we're talking about what happened in Colombia, this is happening across the world, and I think this could something that South Africans should also look out for. I think a lot of people are a bit, to use a lovely South Africanism, or gatful with the current parties that exist. The ANC, the DA, even the EFF. We saw in the local government elections last year, 20% of South Africans voted for parties that weren't one of the big three. That was doubling from 2016, when only 10% of South Africans had voted for parties that weren't the ANC, the DA, or the EFF. And we've seen there have been rumblings that, that people are going to start forming new political parties. We've seen people such as Zongez or Zibi come out. I think Musi Maimani, which is, I mean, you can maybe say he's an establishment guy, sort of, but he's also, I think he's looking to establish something. So I think 2024, we could have some interesting new parties on the ballot, definitely by 2029. And yeah, and I think South Africa is definitely not immune from this kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, kind of anti-establishment politics that's starting to emerge. So I think, yeah, we're definitely probably going to follow that kind of trend. And I think, yeah, just been what's happening around the world in the two countries you've spoken about today, Colombia and France, are just very good examples of this kind of trend that we've seen.
Yeah, on that point about new parties in SA, I think that the other thing that's going to happen is there's probably going to be little mini splits from the ANC, where some sort of fairly popular figure splits off, and you get something like what were these parties called, like ABC and stuff, which managed to claw seats away
ATM.
from the ANC. ATM, of course, which is very probably a Zuma vehicle, chipping away the ANC from 1,000 little directions.
But
So I would not be surprised.
I mean, I'm happy to have a debate on this, but one thing I've looked at, out of the 14 parties that are currently represented in our parliament, I think you can argue that only 4 aren't descended from the ANC in some way or related to it. I mean, the DA, Freedom Front Plus, ACDP, and I can't remember who else said was ACDP, DA, Freedom Front Plus, somebody else. But yeah, I mean, nearly every single party in South Africa is somehow related to the ANC. And I think you're right. Most of these splits are going to come from kind of ANC people who trying to establish the good ANC, which I don't think any of us on this podcast think it exists, but anyway.
Terence, your thoughts on this?
Well, my thoughts on France, I think that it's important to understand that France has a political culture that, let's say, the Anglosphere finds difficult to penetrate. France's political class is not known for its probity. And I remember it was about 15 years ago. There was a sort of saying going through France when I think Jean-Marie Le Pen managed to get through to the final runoff. Vote for the crook, not the fascist. And this was at a time when when France took great delight in pointing at George W. Bush and saying, "Oh, that'd be impossible in France." Well, France is its own. But yes. I think also understand that Macron in some ways was also an alternative. He was, an establishment figure offering an alternative to the establishment, the kind of voice of sanity when the establishment went crazy. Now, as you say, inflation. There's a whole list of things, but I think that maybe in France's case, the Ukraine situation has created a particular alignment of forces. There is maybe not in a geopolitical sense, but a strong sort of cultural aversion to American hegemony, and there's a sense that where do we really stand in all this? Now, Macron has been supportive of Ukraine, but has also tried to dialogue with Russia. Le Pen has always been very critical of the US and the Anglosphere influence. I think that you saw bits and pieces of that reverberating in the vote of both on both the left and the right wings. The other interesting thing is that although France is, let's say, a linchpin of the European Union, their relationship with those institutions has also been somewhat conditional, unlike the Germans who, go for it wholeheartedly. France likes its national identity and it likes the European Union, and when forced to choose, it chooses both. That
was very well put.
So yes, the sort of result is probably best described as very French. As far as South Africa's future, I've watched the excitement around Songezo Zibi, and I think very formidable intellect. But there's just 2 words that keep on ringing in my ears when I see the excitement. That is Mompele Rampele, and also Louis Late. The idea that, hi, I'm the guy you've been waiting for, and I'm gonna sort this lot out. I don't. I think that there'll be a big splash, but I don't see much. I don't see a huge amount coming from that. I may be wrong. Who knows? There's a lot of water to go under the bridge, but he seems to be playing off this well-trod playbook that I've kind of got the solution that'll set us all right, either because I'm a great businessman or because I'm Mampele Rampele, who's just Mampele Rampele, and that's all you need. And Zibi's idea is the middle class and professionals need to get involved, and that's nice, but bear in mind you need a massive you need money, you need a machine behind it, and I'm not sure that is really really available. For all of the ANC's multitudinous sins, its brand is still remains powerful. Let's say we had an election today, worst possible case for the ANC as it gets to the 45%. Well, that's still more than 4 in every 10 people in South Africa, in the face of all the nonsense that happens. I watch with interest. Maybe what we can say here is it could be a very South African outcome.
No, that's definitely the case. Unfortunately, we are out of time.
Can I just quickly make a point, Nick?
Yeah. Go ahead, Marius.
The IFP, I see people asking if the IFP, if it's related to the ANC in the comments. The IFP was definitely an ANC breakaway in the 70s. Mangosuthu Pulezi was a member of the ANC Youth League. So, and they only really split the ANC properly in the late 70s. So the IFP is definitely descended from the ANC in some ways.
Yes.
All right, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for listening. We hope you found it interesting. And I suspect tomorrow we're going to be talking about the story we didn't get to today, which is inflation, which has hit a 5-year high and has gone through the Reserve Bank's inflation target. Anyway, I hope you all stay safe out there, and we'll see you soon on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone.